pod bay doors, please, Hal.
It has been called the most controversial motion picture of its time. It is the most talked about and written about film of the decade. Now, from the director of The Deer Hunter, United Artists presents Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. The story of Jim Averill. He was born into the world of the rich and powerful, but his heart and dreams were with the people. Heaven's Gate. The story of a man's love for a woman, for a people, for a land, for a spirit that would never die. Chris Christopherson in Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate.
The pod bay doors are open. Welcome once again, everyone. I am your host, Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com. And as always, joining me across the country is a man that I'm fairly confident will not let this episode go over budget or behind schedule. The critic and historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, the one and only Mr. Doug Keller. How the heck are you today, sir?
It's getting dangerous to be poor in this country.
Ain't the truth. You can fault today's movie for a lot of things, but that kind of honesty, yeah. No, you can't fault it for that.
No.
We are talking about one of the most notorious films of all time. A movie that is a puzzle to...
It is a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a...
that we're going to try to unravel as best we can. We're talking today about Michael Cimino's notorious flop, Heaven's Gate. Is it worth anything, or is it not? And I have to tell you, I've seen this movie twice in my life with about 30 different attempts to start watching it again that stopped because life got in the way.
I've seen it
Doug
once.
Doug has seen it once. I actually did a...
In one sitting, though. I did it in one sitting.
I did too. I actually did an episode on this. I was a guest on the online movie show with Phil Hall a couple of weeks ago talking about this movie. And so if I repeat myself from there, I don't remember what I said, so if I repeat myself from that episode, forgive me. But anyway, this was Doug's first time, so Doug, tell me, what in the world did you get from this?
So...
it should be said, we both watched the Criterion version, which is 3 hours and 42 minutes long.
It's so damn long.
That is about 12 minutes shorter than Gone with the Wind.
Oh, it is. Like I said to my wife, it is not the longest movie I've ever seen, but it is the longest movie I've ever seen. So the story is worth telling, and it's unfortunately ridiculously prescient even now.
And not a story that a lot of people know.
Right, yeah, and it still holds true, and it's still a problem today, although probably not as blatantly as it is in the film, but
not that you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some aspects of it that modified for a contemporary audience would easily be able to fit into some established narratives that we're living through right now, like the Black Lives Matter movement and the senseless murdering of unarmed black men in our cities. That, it's getting dangerous to be poor in this country, and then the retort was, it always has been.
And the immigration issues.
Yeah, all of that stuff is still regrettably prescient, because this is set in 1890. Now, I can't say that I didn't like this movie, but I also can't particularly say that I liked the movie.
I can't say that I loved it. What I will say about it is, I a couple of weeks ago pulled up my chair to my television set, and with full blinders on, just put my feet in this movie and went along with it. Really trying to figure out what this movie is trying to do, what it's trying to say. Is it as bad as is it as horribly bad as it? Vincent Canby, when this movie came out, wrote, "It is like a forced 4-hour walking tour through one's own living room." What the hell does that even mean?
I know what he means.
And
Uh,
I sat there and I watched it, and because I had seen it before,
mhm.
sometime in the '90s, and I hated it. With every, I stumbled through it the first time with all the power I could muster. If I didn't love movies so much, I wouldn't have gotten through a third of it. But giving myself to it again, or allowing myself to be open to it a second time, I think I appreciated it a good deal more. And I told Doug when we were texting about this, I said, I could easily write an essay about the things that I liked about this movie that would be just as long as another essay about the things that I didn't like about this movie.
And that's what puts it right down the middle of the road. It is not a great movie. I recognize that it's being reevaluated as such, and I saw some newer reviews of it. One calling it the greatest Western ever made, and I think Cimino or Cimino, I'm not sure how to say his name. Um,
Cimino.
Cimino. He he learned a lot of the wrong lessons from specifically McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Um, but in an attempt to be realistic, especially in his sound design, like all this background noise and you can't really hear the conversation that's in front of you. That's exactly how it would have been on the street in 1890. Unfortunately, we're not
Watching a
on the
movie.
street in 1890. We're watching a movie, and we need what they're saying so that we understand what the hell is going on. And so it's he sacrificed clarity for reality,
Mhm.
which is something that he also did to a point in the Deer Hunter. Um, he was a very excessive. He just passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Um, he was a very excessive director. Um, very personal, and that's where the movie has heart, where it doesn't really have logic. So I can give it that. uh, but yeah, why don't you say what it's
Basically,
about?
what this movie is about is it takes place like you said, it takes place in the 1890s. The story deals with, um, this is based on fact, an actual incident that happened in Wyoming at the time, in which wealthy landowners were upset over immigrants that they felt were stealing cattle and encroaching on their land. So these wealthy men drew up a death list of these immigrants and sent hired gunmen out to to pick them off one by one. And now that's the true part. Where this movie separates is that this movie it doesn't deal with it so much up front, but it's there. It sees this as having been sanctioned
Hmm.
by the governor of Wyoming and by the president at the time, Benjamin Harrison. That um, this all went to the top men, and so getting it stopped was nearly impossible because there were men in power,
Hmm.
and people in power have all the power, and so that's what this story is. And it opens with this Marshall who comes in to played by Chris Christopherson, comes to Johnson County to look in on the situation, and he gets more involved than he realizes, and he kind of gets in over his head,
Yeah,
and it
it,
gets ugly,
it does.
and it blows up into, and um, he kind of rallies the immigrants, and it turns into a full scale war. And that's the third act of the movie, is this full scale war between these wealthy landowners and their hitmen and these immigrants. And it's based on, like I say, it's based on facts. It's a fascinating story.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating story. Unfortunately, it could have been a lot shorter.
There's
And
no reason you couldn't wrap this story up in 2.5 hours.
or two. I mean, it's not a complex story. The thing that he the thing that he tried to do, what he tried to flesh out these relatively simple characters with character moments. A lot of character, a lot of character moments that ended up not really adding a whole lot to the individuals or their motivations. A lot of Chris Christopherson's uh, scenes reinforced what we already knew about him instead of adding new dimensions to him. And
Yeah, the characters are always at arm's length.
yeah, I mean, like they were in The Deer Hunter. Um, but here, I like The Deer Hunter more than you do. Um, but it's been a long time since I've seen it. But you know, Western
I have a
Pennsylvanians.
specific problem with the Deer Hunter.
That's also too long. Um, but
Thought it
I,
wasn't long enough, actually. But anyway, go
uh,
ahead.
ooh, that sounds like an episode.
Mhm.
So I just I sat there and I mean it was it was kind of a little wonderful to get to see a young Isabella Huppert and a few other Jeff Bridges shows up and you know Brad Dourif,
Christopher
although
Walken before he became a giant parody of himself.
yeah, before he became a giant parody, but after his Oscar.
Yes,
Um,
after his Oscar.
and you know, Jeff Bridges, Joseph Cotton shows up and is, and I hate to say this out loud, but he was just awful in this.
He has one scene, and it's a speech. He plays the president of a college. We got to talk about the opening. The movie opens for absolutely no reason
I have,
whatsoever at Harvard.
yeah, there's no, except to establish that some of these people knew each other. There's
It,
like
it
25 minutes of nothing.
it's a 25-minute. It's graduation day, and it takes place. I think is it 10 years before,
20.
and something like that. Yeah,
It's
20
in
years
like
before.
1870.
Yeah, and basically, Chris Christopherson's character is graduating from Harvard, and one of his classmates is played by John Hurt, who looks like Martin Short.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. He's got this red mop top. He looks like Martin Short. And they're supposed to be, I believe, in their 20s, but both actors, I think, were probably pushing 50.
Yeah.
And they try to clean him up and make him look like kids, but it doesn't work. But anyway,
Not as yeah.
it's a scene that this was, by the way, the very last scene to be filmed. And excuse me, they're graduating, and Joseph Cotton makes a speech about being men, being good men, being honorable men. And then Martin Short comes along, and by the way, not Martin
John
Short. How
Hurt.
did I say that? John Hurt. I've said that so many times, I get it stuck in my brain. He's dead now. What's he gonna do? Um, Martin Short comes up to give the valedictory speech.
John Hurt. John Hurt.
John Hurt. Why do I keep doing that? John Hurt comes up to give the valedictory speech, and it's nonsense.
See, okay, now,
And he is drunk for the whole movie.
yeah, which I kind of wish I had been, but now he's doing this speech that flashes of it I get where he's going, but for the
Got
most
more out of
part
it than I did.
it sounds like he's just jagging off just to be a jerk, that he's like the valedictorian of Harvard, class of 1870, and he's just making fun of the whole proceedings. Like everybody's laughing. That's all I got from it, because the actual words that he's saying, um, I don't really know what they're supposed to mean when they're strung together, but they seem to know what he was talking about, so I guess it's all good.
What I got from Joseph Cotton was be men, be honorable men. What I got from John Hurt was it's okay, go out and be a jerk.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's
And
basically what I got from it.
John Hurt's character is so baffling in this movie.
And I know why.
Okay, please explain, because the reason.
John Hurt was in this movie. This movie took almost a year to film. And he sat around, the director, Michael Cimino, took so long to do anything that John Hurt was sitting around for days and days and days and days and days, waiting for something to do. And most of his scenes got lost in the editing process. The work print of this film, when Michael Cimino finally showed it to the executives at United Artists, was 5 hours and 25 minutes long. And most of his scenes went with it. John Hurt sat around for so long waiting to get given something to do that he went off and made The Elephant Man. And the entirety of that movie. And came back and finished this one.
Yeah.
And his character really and truly has no, other than the fact that he's a college friend of Chris Christopherson, there's this thing that goes on where the guys get drunk and they start a fight and they start singing to the ladies, and apparently Chris Christopherson falls in love with a woman whose name we never find out who this woman is.
No.
She comes back in the epilogue at the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is pointless.
See, his role, like, it is pointless. It's perplexing because he's in this rich person's society out in Wyoming, mm-hmm. and he's there in all the media. He doesn't agree with doing any of the things that they're planning to do, the death list, the war. He doesn't want to have anything to do with them. But he's always there, and he's always on their side. He even at one point takes up arm. I don't know that he actually takes up a gun, but he's at this battle.
He's on the battlefield, yeah.
He's on the battlefield. Why would you show up that day? Like, you know what's going to happen. You know you don't want it to happen. You don't agree with it. Why is he still going along with it? Every once in a while he does this pithy quip, and then he's out of it for the rest.
Yeah.
It's like, there's no reason for it.
Last time you see him, he's standing on a battlefield, and he's drunk. He's like, I remember Paris, and he gets shot and dies.
Yeah. I mean,
but I get the feeling, and maybe I got this. Maybe you didn't get this, but I did. I got the feeling that character was completely muted, because I kept thinking, it feels very much like there's something I'm missing.
There should have been something else, whether there was or whether there just should have been, I do not know. I cannot say for certain. It's a waste of John Hurt, because he was one of the most gifted actors of his generation. Yeah. And to just have him bumbling around and just making these weird asides, like when Christopherson comes in and says to Sam Waterston, which, by the way, Jack McCoy would be so incensed with Frank Canton
The Sam
They would
Waterston
be, yes, the Sam
who
Waterston
runs
character.
this, who's running this rich man's social club. Who's
Right.
putting
I
this
mean,
list together.
and I kept looking at this like, oh my gosh, this explains why Jack McCoy was so gung ho for justice and trying not to prosecute the little guy, because his great grandfather was this rich asshole that shot poor people for a living. Like,
Right.
I. That's how I contextualized it. I'm like, okay, this gives Jack McCoy more depth, but not uh, Frank Canton.
Well, I'll say this. Um, like I said, to give the movie credit, here's what I got from it. The narrative structure of this film, if you're if you have your head fully stuck in American films, the narrative structure of this film will drive you crazy.
I was gonna say
Because
there's a narrative structure to that.
it is. There's a very good narrative structure. It goes along. It's very European,
It is. It is.
in which, um, in American films, a scene lasts 5 minutes.
Hmm.
In European films, they're allowed to stretch on 10, 15 minutes to really flesh out what they're trying to do, or what the characters mean, or what's going on. So you get a little time. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans were not ready for with this film. And the other thing is, uh, the characters do not introduce themselves. There's a way that Cimino has, and this is to his credit. There's a way that Cimino has in this film in which he trusts that you will catch up.
Right.
You meet two people, they have an association with each other. They're not and you know they're not going to do this thing like my friend Bill, yeah, you're a doctor and I'm a lawyer.
Right. Right.
This is not a Tyler Perry movie.
No.
And you know, look at us, I'm successful and you're successful and we do this and you do this.
Let's
If you
talk
and I
about
were
what we're gonna do and then do it.
it would be like you and me sitting down and I'm talking to you and I'm going, hi, you're my friend Doug. You write for talkmovietome.com, and if we were having this conversation, you would be like, why are you telling me this?
Yeah. Yeah.
This movie does not do that.
No, it really doesn't.
You meet up with people and you're like, okay, they're associated with each other. They know each other. I'm going to catch up with who they are. Because that's how you
Right.
meet people in real life.
Right.
You don't go through their entire background. And but that's to the movie's credit. The only thing is that the characters do tend to sometimes come off as a bit empty because a lot of the characters don't have an arc.
Yeah.
The only one in the movie that really does is Christopher Walken.
Right.
Because the first time you see him, there's an immigrant rancher who's out walking around, and he walks by his clothesline and he sees this shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to introduce himself, and he's got a knife in his hand. He's trying to, I guess he's speaking.
What I figured was they just got done slaughtering a cow.
Yeah.
And,
well, he's holding it like a weapon.
Well, yeah. I mean, he got done They got done slaughtering it. They took the wife and the daughter, took the meat inside, the hide and everything inside, and that was all. The linens were around to create kind of a closed off area for them to do this, but without having the stink inside.
Yeah.
So they carried it off to process and cut up and hang up and dry or treat or salt or whatever they needed to do. And he sees somebody that's not responding, so he picks the knife up and he's like, he's there, he's got it to defend himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden a shotgun blast goes right through his throat.
Yeah.
And that is that for Mr. Russian Immigrant.
And you see, Christopher Walken has a shotgun and he shoots this guy, and you see him through the hole in the linen, and he's just walking away.
Mm-hmm.
And that he's one of the hitmen.
Right.
This character does have an arc because he is not the same person at the beginning of the film that he is at the end.
Right.
And he comes to realize the full brutality of what it is that he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
He should have realized that before he started, but
you know, morality comes to some late. You know.
and money talks.
Well, yes, especially then. Weren't
But
they given
he
like $50 a head?
something like that.
That's a lot of money in the 1890s.
Particularly with that list, because when Chris Christopherson reads that list, there's like 200 people on it.
150, I think. Yeah.
150? Okay.
Yeah, I think there
Yeah,
was 150 people on there. It's like that is just a staggering amount of just and their biggest crime was that they were poor and that they weren't born
and they were
here.
immigrants.
Yeah, they were immigrants and they were poor and the rich, quote unquote natives. You mentioned to me that this was kind of like a larger setting of Gangs of New York, and in a
That's what I
lot
was
of
thinking.
ways, yeah, in a lot of ways it was. The combat and everything between them and the ideology, but at least with Gangs of New York, it was pretty much poor people versus poor people. It was just mainly just bigotry, and
Yeah.
so
Here it's poor people against men with power.
right, and money and influence, and you know the Frank, the Sam Waterston characters, like my whatever uncle is the Secretary of War, and this person is a Secretary of State, and I speak for the president. I've gotten word from the president himself that this is okay. It's like, ah,
Hmm. Yeah.
maybe it. It's
I sensed a miscommunication. I sensed well, this is what he probably meant.
mm-hmm.
That's what I got from it. But it comes down to that whole this big mess that goes on, and Christopherson's trying to stop the men with the death list. And he's largely doing it on his own. And
Well, him him and Isabella Huppert, uh,
yeah,
the prostitute with the heart of gold.
he's largely doing this on his own, and
Yeah.
he's got this romance with Isabelle Huppert, and you do sense that he does care about her a lot. There is a relationship there.
Yeah, but he's also married. So
He's also married, yeah.
she's like, why don't you say, why don't you ask me to marry you? And it's like, well,
See, there's
there
this
could be a
little
problem with that back in
issue.
Missouri. Yeah. Back in old St. Louis, he's got a ball and chain. Yeah, it's and she also kind of has a thing for Chris Walken's Nate,
Yeah,
who I love the line because again she was a prostitute. She says to Chris Christopherson, whose character's name is James, she's like, I never cheated on you. I always made Nate pay.
yeah.
Like,
There's logic to this in 1890.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's
In
not.
2018,
Uh,
in 2018, that makes no logical sense.
no, I mean, there are people who are, married to say, uh, strippers or porn stars that are not in the business themselves, or even if they are, that's business, and home is where they love each other. That's like going to the office. It's not meaningful.
Right.
Just like she takes them up to the bedroom, and it's not meaningful. She takes their money. It's a day at the office. It's Mary Magdalene in the stall. It's
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Like when we were talking about Last Temptation of Christ. It's a job. It's what she does.
right.
It's just and it's a time in Mary Magdalene's time, and also in this woman's time in the late 19th century, women had few options.
And
And
the early 20th century and the middle 20th century and
but I mean, at this time, at this particular time, it's it's much more laid out, and it's fleshed out much better in McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Yes, very much
When
so.
you realize that they had so few options, you could either be a madam, you could be a prostitute, you could sew for a living,
Hmm.
you could be a housewife,
Yeah,
and
take
that's
take
it.
in laundry. You know, do
Taking
do
laundry,
do the
that's
laundry.
all you've got.
Yeah, I mean, it, and some of that was not respectable for a woman who had at least a half decent family. They could
Yeah,
be poor, but she wouldn't be allowed to work. You
right.
know, like we saw in The Great Dictator when the Paulette Goddard character is taken in laundry, and it's not something that they thought she should be doing, but they knew that it was something she had to do.
Hmm.
So, and that's all this, especially out west. Um, in the McCabe and Mrs. Miller, I think is a very big touchstone for this picture.
Hmm.
Um, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, The Wild Bunch, and there's probably one or two others. Uh,
But
Once
those
Upon a
films
Time in the
had a
West and
lot more
stuff.
personality than this one does. This
Much
one is
more, much more.
very light on personality.
And I think Chris Christopherson can be a good actor, but here he's just kind of an empty mouthpiece. He's there to be Joe Everyman's representation, and that's all he ever really gets to be. He doesn't really get to. He never really moves his face. I mean,
Yeah,
he and Buster Keaton, he in this movie and Buster Keaton could have a stone face off, and I don't know
right.
who would win. Um, because he just stands there with this grim, dour expression on his face, even when he's in bed with Isabella Huppert. I don't really know how you can have a dour look on your face when you're in bed with young Isabella Huppert. I mean, I don't understand that at all. I mean, travel back 38 years and good God, that's like
Yeah,
how
yeah, I
I
get that.
mean, how, like that doesn't even make him happy. I mean, if that doesn't make you happy, nothing will. Um,
Well, the other problem with the characters is this. We get characters, we get Chris Christopherson, we get Isabelle Huppert, who is a little bit miscast, you have to admit. Because
a little.
why is a why is a French woman running a bordello in the 19th century in Wyoming? I don't quite get that, but
Why not?
um,
An
Chris
English woman was
Christopherson,
married was running a bordello in McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
that's true, that's very true. But I mean, you got Chris Christopherson, Isabelle Huppert, you got um, uh, Christopher Walken, you got all these different people. The people who don't get a character here are the immigrants.
They are just a nameless, faceless group of that they
They
spend
do not
so much
get to tell
time
their own
on.
story.
Oh my god, they spend so much time on their reactions to things.
Mhm.
It's like something happens and then we have to watch like, I don't know, 45 minutes of them yelling at each other about what they just heard that took 2 seconds to tell. And then it's like a 5-minute reaction shot of everybody yelling, and then something else gets through, and then they yell about that, and then they start to fight with each other. And I mean, there's so much time, and I think we are supposed to actually know who some of them are
Yeah,
because
Brad
we
Dourif is
see,
in it.
yeah,
Brad Dourif is
and I
barely in
didn't
this.
know that. I'm watching that. I'm watching this, and at the end of it, I look at the cast list on IMDb, and it's like, and Brad Dourif. I'm like, really? Where? Because I know what Brad Dourif looks like, and I did not see him at all.
He's in there.
I, I missed him completely. Uh, and how you can just not feature somebody like Brad Dourif. I mean, because this is after he was in Wise Blood for John Huston. I
Right.
mean, uh, and that is
This is
that
after his
is
Oscar nomination for Cuckoo's Nest.
right. I mean, he is such a dynamic actor that it's actually a shame that he doesn't work more. He's not more well known.
Yeah.
Um, the last thing I know he's worked since then. He was in the Lord of the Rings. He was Wormtongue, and he was a recurring role on Star Trek Voyager back in the
Yeah.
mid '90s, early 2000s.
He's a good
Uh,
actor.
he's a great actor, but
Unfortunately, most known as the voice of Chucky
yeah.
to this generation. And he's a good actor. The only thing is, it's very easy to get lost in this movie, unless you are
Yeah,
one of the three leads. It's
like
very very easy. Mickey Rourke shows up in this for
I
no
thought
reason at
so.
all.
Yeah, I mean,
John Defoe is in this,
yeah,
and they just get lost.
yeah. I mean, there are so many people. It's like this whole movie ends up being a precursor for the Land Rush site or Land Rush scene in Far and Away.
Yeah,
Like, but that's the whole. It's the whole movie. Everything is so busy. There are always so many people in frame, or that you can hear in frame, and it felt like like the Foley effects were given more precedent than the actual dialogue. Like I think they
yeah.
mic'd the shoes. Like they put little microphones in the shoes so you could get this clump clump clump, but while they're trying to talk all you hear is clump clump clump, and you need subtitles, and
I had to make use of the subtitles this last time because I could not hear a lot of the
I
dialogue, and it did make it did help a
I'm sure
lot.
it did. I decided to watch it as if I were in a theater without the benefit of so that I could get the experience as much as I could of
Maybe
what
that's why I liked it a little more than you did because I got all the dialogue with subtitles.
because like I kind of wanted to see from the perspective of the people who saw it in 1980. Obviously, I didn't have a sweeping 20, you know, 80-foot screen to watch it on, which probably looked gorgeous on. Vilmos Zsigmond
Oh my god,
is one of the
this is a
best.
gorgeous looking movie.
It really is. I still don't understand Roger Ebert's hang up on
I don't
that,
either.
but
He wrote a review of this that was so dismissive, and all he could write about was he said there's for more than half the movie there's smoke that billows across the screen. Well, there is. And he
yeah,
said it was such a distraction that it just destroyed the movie for him.
I
And I'm
can't.
like, it,
But I mean, he did that with Spielberg's War of the Worlds too.
yeah,
He went on for almost his entire piece about how tripods are inefficient, and an advanced civilization wouldn't use tripods as vehicles,
he got hung
and
up on.
that was it. That was all he could write
Yeah, he
about.
got hung up on that.
And I think it was Attack of the Clones where the only thing he talked about was how blurry the image was, and then he went
No,
back
the
to
only thing he
read.
talked about in Attack of the Clones was the dialogue.
Well, I remember reading that he didn't like the way it looked, that it was fuzzy and the effects were bad, and then he went to go see. He went upstairs where they were projecting it digitally, and everything was crisp and clean. And he's like, "Oh, so it's the print that we have, and it's not
Yeah,
the film." And then he kind of let that go. But I didn't see that at all. I thought that it looked gorgeous. It has This movie is very, very, very informed by a lot of other epics.
hmm
Um, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Doctor Zhivago,
yeah.
a lot of which maybe you like. I think that it's one of the most boring things I've ever seen in my
I'm
life.
not a fan of Doctor Zhivago.
Okay, good. Because
It's dull.
it's so dull. And so,
I
and
sat through it.
yeah, me too. I've tried on other occasions, but I'm like, it's like I can't. I'm not following this, and I don't feel like I want to. So I'm just gonna
But
move on.
um, what I got from it, and I'm always trying to put myself in the director's head because what is the director trying to do? He wants you to feel. Cimino wants you to feel as if you are looking at Wyoming in the 1890s.
And hearing
You
it.
are not looking at the back lot of Paramount. You are
Right.
not looking at, Monument Valley with the rail tracks and
Right.
all of that.
Right.
He wants you to feel that you're there. The realism is there. That's what I really hooked onto was the realism because
Absolutely.
this
He.
this thing is coming. And hold,
Yeah.
let me do this because this is where I really love the movie. What I really love about it, I should say. The situation that is going on is a dire, ugly, deadly, brutal situation in which these men are trying to kill immigrants.
Hmm.
It's coming. It's on its way. It's happening. And there are long spaces of time that take place in which you realize there's time to stop this from happening. And they don't have the means to do that.
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So there are these long stretches in which you realize there's a steamroller on its way, and you don't know what to do about it.
This.
That's the tension for me.
Right. The immigrants are. It's like the steamroller shot in the Austin Powers movie when
Right,
they're
right,
like, you know, 25 feet away going 5 miles an hour, but this guy just stands there and screams and ends up getting squished.
right.
It's he could have done something to move, and he didn't. Uh, the
But he had
the
room to move.
well, yeah, he had room to move. He had time. He all he really needed to do was go about 4 steps to his right or his left, and he would have been fine.
But
So, but this, I appreciate that the length of it is designed to make you feel the waiting and the inability for what's his name, James, Chris Christopherson's character, to persuade the right people that this is a wrong endeavor and persuade the people who will eventually be victimized to kind of move in a more protective stance. They just yell at him like, "Well, why are you doing this?" It's like, "Well, I wanted to tell you about this list because, I think it's wrong and I wanted you guys to know that it was out here so you weren't caught unawares." And they're like, "Well, do something about it." It's like
well, he's a lawman.
he is. He is.
He's in the system.
Unfortunately, isn't he a sheriff from St. Louis?
He's a
He does.
marshal. He's
He's a
actually
marshal.
he's
Okay.
no, he's actually
Okay.
from Johnson County,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
and he comes out to investigate this situation. He can't
Right.
get anybody to listen to him, and it's a David and Goliath situation because he realizes
Yeah.
that it's a dangerous situation. There are going to be scores of people just wiped out for no reason
Mm-hmm.
because these men are in power.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it has that realistic pace that makes it feel a little more tense. Nothing in this movie ever feels to me manufactured.
Right. No. Everything is very naturalistic, and I feel like if Cimino had to wait like 15 years to make this, how much do you want to bet Jeff Bridges would have been the marshal instead
Yeah,
of the barman?
yeah.
I mean, it would have been a precursor to his Rooster Cogburn. Um,
Jeff Bridges plays his kind of his informant.
right.
He's on the inside.
Yeah.
He's friends with the immigrants, and he kind of he kind of gets Christopherson in with the immigrants to know who they are and
Right.
gets them to
He's the saloon keeper,
right, right.
and he might have been actually my favorite character. Um,
I think
just
Walken is my favorite character.
I liked Walken's character. I liked that he had an arc, but just personally, the personability, the personality that Bridges often brings to his roles, whether they're good or bad, just endeared me to him more than
And
Ethan
mostly
Hawke.
because it's Jeff Bridges, and he's
Yeah,
just
that's exactly
most
my point.
inviting
Yeah,
of most
yeah.
inviting actor.
He's just a very generous, inviting person. It's just like, well, you know what? I like you, and but you're right. Nothing is manufactured. Nothing happens because the plot needs it to happen, which I in part commend Cimino for and in
Mhm.
part condemn him for because sometimes
A lot of people condemn him for that.
you just need an action to push things forward. This lackadaisical, this would have been a great novel.
It has the poetic kind of structure that you read.
Yeah, it feels less like a film and more, and this was an original screenplay.
Yes,
So this feels more like an adaptation, like he's trying to get the texture and the nuance of the novel up on screen for the people who love it. Feels like this is like an early Bonfire of the Vanities, which was also a massive, overexpensive dud.
I read the book, and the movie was travesty. Sometimes that happens.
Well, yeah. I mean, and they tried so hard to get it so right, and it ended up being the exact opposite of everything that they needed to do for that. And this feels like. Do you remember in Wonder Boys when uh, the Katie Holmes character finally reads Grady's book? And she says, "You know how in class you're always telling us that you need to make choices? Well, it didn't feel like you made any." It didn't
Yeah,
feel like Jamino was making any editorial choices. Like he just wanted everything that he could get on the screen, which is he doesn't tighten anything for pacing, which is why when they took it away from him and they cut like what an hour and 17 minutes or an hour
they
and
didn't
2
take it
minutes
away from him. They didn't take it away from him.
or he recut
Um,
it.
what happened was the movie that he showed them, or the movie that was shown to the New York premiere, is the movie we saw.
Hmm.
3 hours and 42 minutes long. It got these abhorrent,
Yeah.
terrible reviews. I mean, everybody just, they were like a pack of wild dogs.
Hmm.
He wrote a letter to one of the executives at UA, the United Artists, and he said, let me pull the film, recut it, so that I can present to the public a finished product. Because the editing for this film took 18 months. And he just got it done in time to have something presentable for the New York premiere. They were shown the version we saw, which was a mistake.
Yes.
Here's a little backstory. Maybe this will help you understand. Michael Cimino came from commercials. He started directing commercials for Madison Avenue, and he did things for Kodak and Pepsi and things like that. He did brilliant, beautiful work.
Hmm.
The problem with Michael Cimino is that he did not have his eye on the ball.
Right.
He took so long to do anything that he drove people crazy and he cost people a lot of money.
Hmm.
His first film was a movie called Thunderbolt and Lightfoot,
Hmm.
which starred and was produced by Clint Eastwood. And the reason that movie worked is because Clint Eastwood had this ability to rein him in, because on Heaven's Gate he didn't have that, and he would go on and he would do 130 takes of the same, of the master shot.
Right. Right. Right.
On Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, he didn't have that. Clint Eastwood said, he said, Michael, "Can I do one more?" He said, "No, no, we got it. Let's move on." That's why Thunderbolt and Lightfoot worked.
Right.
He had the same thing with Barry Spikings on the Deer Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
They could say, okay, we got it, let's move on. The fact that he won 5 Academy Awards for the Deer Hunter gave him complete autonomy
Mm-hmm.
on Heaven's Gate. United Artists essentially gave him a blank check.
Right.
Because United Artists,
Carte blanche here. Do whatever you want. The Deer Hunter was so successful. You personally won 2 Oscars, and the film got 3 more. Do what you need to do, man.
well, United Artists was under new management, and they were trying to, make a name for themselves, and they thought they could do it with Michael Cimino because of the Deer Hunter.
Right.
So they let him do whatever he wanted, and they gave him this, and he hired his own producer. He hired a friend of his named Joanne Corelli, who had never produced before. She was not the person to rein him in. Well, in the first 5 days of shooting, this thing was over budget and behind schedule. And he had this thing about, he didn't care about the numbers. He didn't care about the money. He would just spend days and days and days in the same room organizing people into position and not shooting anything. Or he would sit outside and wait for the sun to get, or cloud to get in a certain place. And that cost money.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie, which was supposed to be shot in, I believe, about 3 months, went on and on and on and on, and a $7 million budget ballooned to about 45, which today doesn't sound like anything because actors make $45 million.
No, but in 1979,
Yeah, yeah.
movies weren't made for that much. I mean, you had I don't Star Wars was only like
10.
Yeah, it was like nowadays you get The Last Jedi, and that was $150 million, but the original one was like 10 million, $12 million.
Last Jedi also was a guarantee,
Well, that's true.
but he was driving everybody crazy, and it was just taking so long. And the executives were like, "Okay, you're going to break our bank if you keep doing this," because the budget just went over. And they thought that when this whole process was over, year-long process that had taken place, they thought when it was all over that the movie's going to go up and it's going to win all these Academy Awards.
It was nominated for one.
It was nominated for one. I really think it would have been the greatest middle finger if it had been nominated for the editing, but it wasn't. It was Vilmos Sigmund, I think, for the cinematography.
I thought it was production design.
Was it production design? Okay. It was one Oscar and it didn't win it.
Right.
But it ended up this journalist, this Hungarian journalist named Les Capet, had asked for access to the set, and he didn't. And Cimino wasn't allowing access to this film to the press. So he got hired on later as an extra. And he reported back that this production was a complete disaster. That news fed on itself.
Mm-hmm. What it did win, it was art direction and set decoration nominee at the Oscars. What it did win were Razzies for Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst.
Oh yeah.
It was nominated for Worst Actor, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Musical Score.
Heavily honored
at the Razzies.
At the Razzies. But anyway, the news that Capet comes back with starts feeding on itself, and the critics love it because it makes good news.
Mm-hmm.
If this were social media now, this movie would have been destroyed before it even got out.
Yeah.
They put the thing out, again, 18 months worth of editing. They put the thing out in one theater in New York. The critics just eviscerate it, and they pull it. And when they pull it, it looks like United Artists got cold feet.
Right.
And nobody goes to see it. They pull the movie before the public can see it, which is why it bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the critics and the press just eat this up, and it goes on to become one of the most notorious bombs of all time. United Artists, which was started by the man we talked about last week, Charlie Chaplin, is destroyed by this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only saved a little bit by For Your Eyes Only.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, United Artists had to sell off its assets, file for bankruptcy,
Mm-hmm.
and this movie just kind of wallows around and just kind of wallows around until home video. Home video comes around, and people get a chance to see it and judge for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You have varying opinions on this film, and
Widely varying
widely
opinions.
varying opinions on this film, on whether or not it's a masterpiece and whether or not it is it flawed. Is it? You've heard ours today, and ours represents, I think, the wide berth of people who have seen this film, and it has gotten a reevaluation, and I'm glad it has. I'm glad it has
Yeah.
because it's not a terrible film, but it's divisive, and I would like the people to see it to judge for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, you've gotta see it for yourself because it's not a valueless film as you were describing it to me before I watched it. Um, there's something to it, and there's the spine of a good story, and there's there are flourishes, there are parts that are just kind of
Breathtaking.
captivating, yeah. But then there are longer parts that are just like, can we get back to one of the interesting parts? Like, it wallows in itself. Uh, it doesn't have a sense of urgency,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you kind of need in films, especially because this is trying to be a deliberately paced action movie, which doesn't work. Especially like it starts off after, it starts off isn't the Christopher Walken murder before Harvard, or is that just after?
Everything is after Harvard.
Okay, so we see Harvard, and then we see Christopher Walken shoot a man with a shotgun,
Mm-hmm.
and it's brutal, it's violent, it's right off the bat, blood splats. There's
But you
there's
can't really see
there's
what one has to do with the other because it's like you come from this celebration of
yeah,
men graduating from college to this, and it's like, okay, what are you trying to say here?
right, and then you get Chris Christopherson on a train, and
I
you're
think the movie would have been much better off if you had just gotten rid of it. If you'd have just gotten rid of basically the beginning and the ending scene, the whole
yeah.
Harvard thing could go. The whole
Oh
Harvard
yeah.
thing.
Oh yeah,
And if you
absolutely.
opened with that murder, that's a jolt.
Right. That would have been you get through the 3 hours of credits because the credits feel like they're 3 hours long.
They did this. He did the same thing in The Deer Hunter.
Yes, he did.
It's this black background with white text, and the music is playing, and it shows you name after name after
It's
name after
just
name after name, and it's like
oh,
it seriously, it goes on for 5-10 minutes, and
it's incredible because I felt like I had just watched the whole 3 hours and 42 minutes in the credits, and
Mhm.
so you get through that, and it's if it would have had that gunshot, and then uh, you know he's a marshal, he he would know these people, he would know the people around. If you just established that he was kind of somebody who was in and out of that town,
Yeah.
um, kind of like Marshall Dillon in Gunsmoke, you
Mhm.
know, like he knows everybody in Dodge, even though he has to go out and do the county and all out in the state, he still comes back and he knows people. If he could have been established as a resident, and um, he finds out about this kill list that they could have even said, like that one line that they said that the reason that they don't like him is because he's a rich man from a good family who pretends to be poor.
Mm-hmm.
They could say that, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, he actually has money, but he's trying to do something good with his life.
Right.
Instead of just make himself more money. You didn't. There's so much that could have been condensed and reworked to make it a clearer, more exciting narrative, that even if it still ended up being 3 hours and 42 minutes, it would have been a completely engaging 3 hours and 42 minutes instead of half of it being establishing shots that go on for 5 minutes.
There are a few things in the movie that this is not a movie you can really get with emotionally.
No.
The emotional investment is very distant. There is a scene though. There's a character in this movie. He's not in the movie very much. He's a ticket taker at the train station, played by
Oh,
Richard.
yeah. I liked him. I was so
And he
sad when
comes
he got
in,
shot.
and he kind of explains to James, to Christopher Stoffers, on what's going on.
And if
And you
you
can
can
tell
hear any of what he's saying, he lays out the whole thing.
and you can tell he's just a working man. He's
Yeah.
just there and he's doing. There's
And
a
he
scene late in the
he
film.
knows James. They're kind
Right.
of friendly.
There's a scene late, and that's what I meant when I said that you kind of catch up with the characters
Hmm.
because they don't really introduce themselves. They just
Right.
start talking.
He's like, "Hey, what are you doing as a porter?" You get the impression that he had a better job before, and then um, on the fact that he was Irish,
Mhm.
he got fired from whatever good job he had, and he's like, "Well, I just got this job, and this is the best I can do."
He is late in the film targeted. He's on the list. He's targeted for being in collusion with the people that are on the list,
It's so
and
sad.
they shoot him
That is the
brutally.
saddest part of the whole movie.
That is the saddest part of the whole movie, and
Oh,
it's just you feel the senselessness of that.
absolutely. Yeah. No, that character I really liked, despite barely knowing what he said. I'm gonna keep harping on that. The sound
I can't say
design,
that. I can't say that because I watched it with the subtitles. But
the sound design. I mean,
you're right. The sound design. I thought it was just the DVD that I had. I had the Criterion edition. So did you.
yeah.
And I was surprised because it was just the sound was just so
But
muted.
but I think because that was restored and done when Cimino was still alive, I think he signed off on. I think it was a director approved, one of Criterion's director approved editions, which means that's how he wanted it. Which means he made a bad decision and he stuck to his guns and went
Right.
with it all
And
the
a lot
way
of that.
through. But there are a lot of bad decisions in this. There's the
I felt bad also at the very end. Um, when the war is over, they seem to have won, and they're getting ready to leave. Chris Christopherson, Isabelle Huppert, and Jeff Bridges, and they're getting ready to leave. And there's this quiet scene. It's like on a Sunday morning, and they're getting dressed, and they step out the door, and they are shot.
yeah, just gunned down.
Jeff Bridges and Isabelle Huppert are killed. I think, again, the movie would have had a great punch if that's where the movie ended.
Hmm.
There is an add-on to the end of this movie that makes no sense. Because we cut to 13 years later, and Chris Christopherson is on a steamship, apparently still thinking about Isabelle Huppert. Her name was Ella
Hmm.
in the movie. And he has apparently, I guess, married
That's
the
what I
woman.
get. I mean, but he had that picture
Maybe
the
he was
whole time.
already married to
He
her.
was already married because that was his wedding picture that they kept looking at. Like when he got stinko drunk and Jeff Bridges took him into that room in the back where he eventually moved into,
That's the scene
and
with the whip.
yeah, like even before that, like they look over, he's passed out, and they see this picture. Ella sees it, and there it's specifically singled out by the camera on more than one occasion,
Yeah.
indicating that it is important in to some degree. So I think that that was a wedding picture that, especially Ella, whenever she sees it, she gets upset because she's like, well, I want to marry James, but I can't ish. Laws were a little bit. I mean, you
Yeah.
could you could have had you could have had a wedding certificate in every city, in every state, in every
Right.
in the union, and eventually somebody might catch up with you if somebody goes looking for you, you know.
Right.
But that's the only time they're going to find out, because they didn't, you know, communicate out. There wasn't a database. They didn't know. They didn't have any of that stuff yet. So he could easily have stayed there
Marry her.
and married her and never gone back to St. Louis, where his wife seems to be. And that shot, I mean, it's just, and I'm trying to remember it in detail. It's just, it's in a house, and it's a woman in a white lace gown, just in this cold, terrible looking house. just, just this very sterile environment. She just walks, like, away from the camera. What, what is that?
And the scene at the end of the movie, when you see this woman on the steamship, it's the
Yeah,
same woman that he was looking at when he graduated from Harvard.
yeah.
And he's looking out the window of this ship, and she asks for a cigarette. And
Mm-hmm.
then he looks out the window again, and the movie's over.
Yeah, it's like it.
It's like you're watching episode 15 of a series, and you've missed an episode.
It feels like you've missed episodes 10 through 14.
Yeah, it's like you're watching It's like you're watching a show, and you've missed episodes 10 through 14.
Like the way that Heaven's Gate ends up being structured is exactly like a series where Harvard is episode 1, right? Actually, the graduation might even be episode 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You've missed episodes 1 and 2. And then uh, it changes the day, and you don't know when it's on. So, a month and a half later, you've missed 6 more episodes,
Right.
and that's the intervening 20 years. And then you catch, uh, episodes, what, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then that's the story, and then you miss another 4 or 5 episodes, and you catch up with episode 15, 16, and it's this on the ship, and then you find out, well, there's still like 4 episodes left in the season, but I don't care anymore, and you just don't watch the end.
Yeah.
Like,
You're watching a miniseries, and you keep skipping around, and you keep
yeah,
missing.
yeah, yeah.
The
It's
central
like,
core of the film works, but there's all this other little stuff going on that you've missed. It just doesn't feel finished. There's a John Hurt part. Like I say, there's a John Hurt part. You feel like you're missing a large chunk of that story.
every John Hurt part, you feel like you're missing a huge chunk of the story. This is a classic example of the bucket of crabs. You
Yeah.
know, there's a few crabs that are almost out of the bucket, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of the crabs start pulling them back into the bucket. Like,
Right.
those crabs are the ones that could make everything really good, and the other ones that are still in the bucket that are pulling them down to try to climb out themselves is everything, all the bad decisions that the actors, Cimino and some of the other craftsmen made, that's pulling everything back down, and then that's trying to assert its dominance, and then that gets pulled back down.
Right.
And I want you to talk about, because you brought this up, and I don't want you to forget it, the communal effort that was involved in making this picture.
There is when we're recording this, not to date the episode, but we're recording this on the same week that the the Blu-ray and DVD of Star Wars: The Last Jedi comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched the documentary. We watched the documentary on it. What is it called? The Director and the Last Jedi, or the Director and the Jedi.
The Director and the Jedi. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you watch that documentary, not just because, and I equate this to most movies, not just Star Wars, but you get the feeling watching that documentary that you are watching a community effort.
Right.
The director is at the center. He's kind of commanding everything. But you get the feeling there are different communities going on. There's a community that's dealing with the island stuff. There's a community that's dealing with the rebel stuff. There's a community that's dealing with the casino stuff. And it's all a community effort. Mm-hmm. And there are 1,000 people there. And you get the feeling that, and from this documentary, that when they're making this movie, they're scheduling it within an inch of their lives.
Yeah, they have
This
to.
has got to be done here, this has got to be done here, this has got to be done here. And someone says in the documentary, if the director gets sick, we're sunk.
Yeah.
If one of the actors gets sick, we're sunk.
Because they not only had a studio with an executive producer saying, you have this amount of money and this amount of days because this is your hard open date.
Right.
You have a premiere date and you cannot miss it. This is when this movie opens, which means you have to have everything shot by this time. You have to have everything cut by this time. It has to be scored, and the special effects have to be done by this time. And I want it in the can at least a month before it goes out, so that we can make sure that everything's going to be all right with it.
And you can see in Rian Johnson's eyes that he is aware of all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
The difference between that movie and Heaven's Gate is that Michael Cimino did not care.
No.
What he cared about was that he was a director and he was making the best movie of his life. He was, for himself and everybody who made this movie, everybody who was working on Heaven's Gate, were convinced, because Michael was a very charming guy, were convinced they thought they were making Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And it is easy to look at what the product that came out of it. If you were in the middle of filming all of it, it's easy to believe that.
Oh, sure, the grand scale and
the grand scale of it, and the casting in it, and everything that goes on. It's easy to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was, he embellished himself and took so long to get it done. And as we always say, the thing I always say on this show is art and commerce are squabbling siblings. But you cannot have one without the other.
Right.
And he needed someone to pull him in and say, okay, we got to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, all of that time that he took, that year that he took to do this, got in the press, and it basically poisoned whatever success the movie could have had. I believe that had it not been for all of the bad press and all of the rotten reviews because of all that, the production troubles and things like that, this would have come out. It would have gotten good to middling reviews. It would have gotten a few Oscar nominations and then gone away.
Right. The thing. It's funny that this premiered a year after Apocalypse Now, which had the same trouble. Coppola was just...
Not exactly.
Well, Coppola was very indulgent. He lost his mind in the jungle. Yes, he had to deal with Martin Sheen's heart attack and deal. There's a whole. Apocalypse Now is definitely going to be an episode,
Yeah.
but it took
Coppola had
forever.
to deal with a lot of external problems, and Cimino
Sure,
didn't.
he, but he also got lost in his footage.
Yeah.
He wanted to shoot this, and he would retake, and then he would redo, and then he would rewrite, and then he would reshoot, and he had miles of film.
Hmm.
It took him like 3 years to edit, and when he finally did, he had a rough cut that went to Cannes that won the Palme d'Or. And then they were like, "Well, is this ever going to come out?" He refined it again, and it premiered, and it did really, really well. But it was that are we ever going to see Apocalypse Now? Are we ever going to see Heaven's Gate? Uh, the same thing happened to Chaplin when he was doing The Great Dictator. It kept changing
Yeah.
and emerging, and they're like, "Are we ever going to get to see this movie?" Uh, the difference here is that he Cimino was so set in what he believed was going to work that he could not see the forest from the trees.
Right.
And I think he took care in getting scenes and sequences right without getting the overarching
He
story
let
and
other things
shape.
fall by the wayside.
Right. He didn't end up putting a shape to his movie,
Mhm.
and it became amorphous.
Right. Um, it also, if you look at the films that have flopped over and died, or well, obviously flopped over and died, but had a serious, massive production problem,
Mm-hmm.
like Cleopatra,
Oh.
was only saved because the public wanted to see Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Apocalypse Now was saved because it was a damn good movie.
Yes. The same thing happened with Fitzcarraldo.
Right.
Werner Herzog's pulling that ship over a mountain
Mm-hmm.
in, what is it, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, somewhere down in there.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, you watch the documentary on that, Burden of Dreams, and you see what he did. They really did pull that thing over. People died making this movie, pulling
Right.
that boat over this mountain. And but the movie is spectacular.
Heaven's Gate does not have any of that.
No, nothing.
Heaven's Gate only had the indulgence.
Yes.
The producers, the executives at UA were really hoping that the premiere would go well. But the premiere was poisoned by all that bad press.
Mm-hmm.
By the fact that they would, because the press loves failure. They love
Oh well,
stories.
yeah, and they love when somebody that they've hailed as being great fails. We talked about that with M. Night Shyamalan.
Hmm.
Uh, the second he made something that wasn't quite up to snuff, and like it was
They jumped on it.
Unbreakable. They jumped on Unbreakable, which is an okay picture. You like it more than I do. Um, and then he made Signs, and they're like, yeah, okay, all right, it's not as good, but it's a lot better. And then he made The Village, and then from then until what, The Visit,
Yeah, the
Split,
visit.
uh, he just got nothing but just crap for his movies, and largely it was earned because he was making dumpy movies. But he, I don't. They really seemed to like to jump on him, and when The Visit came out, when Split came out, people were really reticent to say, "Oh, this is a good Shyamalan movie," because they didn't want to be ostracized for liking somebody who had been uh, basically a pariah for the last decade.
It's the saddest thing that can happen. It's an extraordinarily talented director who persistently makes bad decisions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was Michael Cimino's problem. He was an extraordinarily talented director.
Hmm.
He just wouldn't rein himself in. He just wouldn't see that he had other things to consider other than the art. and
Right.
he was his own worst enemy. And it was
Hmm.
largely his fault. And I should say this: this movie put a cigarette out in the whole auteur era.
Yeah. This was the nail in the final nail in the coffin for what I term as the decade of directors, which was the 1970s when directors were given a lot of reign because they had the knowledge of film history, and the Europeans were demonstrating that the director had all the power, and they were getting good stuff made, and it was making a lot of money. And then this happened, and the studios started to reassert their power, and that's why you get the Studio 80s.
Yeah, studio. That's why you get the blockbuster era that we're still living in. Chris Christopherson, right after the movie came out, um, he said the fallout from this is that the powers that be decided that the director um, didn't need to be the one running things.
Right,
And he said to somebody, he said that they decided that the creative people didn't need to be running things.
right.
And he asked an executive at some function, he said, well, who are you going to give it to? Young creative people? And he said, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Now, see, this and all of the people that say, "Oh, Steven Spielberg with Jaws and George Lucas with Star Wars, killed the artistic quality of the '70s, and that's why
Not
everybody's
true.
sequel obsessed and everything." No, no, it is Heaven's Gate because this guy destroyed a studio, and he only directed four more feature-length films after that, from 1980 until 2007.
And
The
I've seen all of them.
2007 was a short film. Now, see, I hated the Desperate Hours because I love the original with
Oh, that
Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart picture. He remade a Humphrey Bogart picture with Mickey Rourke, and it
I know.
was
It's like, what are you doing?
ugh.
What
And
are you doing? The
he made this
Sicilian?
terrible.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
oh.
The Sicilian was based on a book about Michael Corleone's time in Italy, and this was just I don't. It was rewritten for Christopher Lambert, and it didn't work, and it was
Oh
terrible.
man, it is just awful.
He made a negligible film. I think it was the last film he directed. Was a movie called Sun Chasers.
Yeah.
The only movie I liked, the only good movie he made after Heaven's Gate was a movie called The Year of Living Dangerously. I
Mm,
like that film very much.
Year of a Dragon. Year of
Right.
Living Dangerously was Peter Weir.
Was it Peter Weir?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
Year of the Dragon with Mickey Rourke in '85.
Year of the Dragon. That was it. I like that film. It's a good movie. But he never got work again.
I
And
mean,
it destroyed his career.
it's not really unsurprising either. I
No,
mean,
it's not.
I mean, how what kind of studio is going to look at a guy that took a very prosperous, well-known, famous independent studio and took
Started
it
by
out?
Charlie Chaplin.
Started by Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and if D.W. Griffith's excesses couldn't sink it, and if Chaplin's excesses couldn't sink it, then it must have looked like the most buoyant thing on the filmic ocean.
Yeah.
But then up comes Cimino, and he completely destroys an entire studio. Who's going to look at that and go, you know what? I want to give him money now to make a
Yeah.
picture for us. Like,
Here, take some money. Well,
right.
it could have worked. You just have to. It could have worked. You just have to give him some producers that are going to be like, we're not going to do that. You
Right.
have to give him people that are going to rein him in.
Hmm.
That's what it would have worked.
Right.
Um, it just. I think he was an extraordinarily talented director who just.
Yes.
Yeah.
He made a lot of bad choices, and then he was forced into subpar material, and then he was basically just shut out of the game. He wrote a few scripts after, but he was basically out of it. This pretty much destroyed his career along with United Artists. Um, Now, moving into recommendations, the one that sticks out was one that I mentioned on numerous occasions was Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller. A great anti-western that has some kind of the same themes, not necessarily rich people killing poor people, but wealthier people coming in to try to take over a smaller business because it is profitable, and using force, and the relationship between um, Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, who were an item at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just great to watch it. And the other thing that I could say to recommend along with that is, if you're going to watch McCabe and Mrs. Miller, also take a look at Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. Because
Yeah.
this movie takes all of the lessons that he should have learned, or when I'm watching it, because actually the second movie, it feels like Once Upon a Time in America, which is stagnant and boring. It's like he took the wrong lessons from these movies. Like like these epics, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna take the muddled sound design of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, but not direct your attention with changing the levels of the dialogue so that you
Right.
can work out where your concentration needs to be. I'm just going to amp up everything in the background and make you feel like you're on the street. Well, I felt like I was on the street. I even had to check my shoe. I was just making sure I hadn't stepped in. I was sitting in my chair. I was making sure I didn't step in anything. I felt like I was on an 1890s street in the middle of Wyoming, in the middle of nowhere. Like but unfortunately, the horse dung stuck around
Yeah.
because and McCabe and Mrs. Miller has, for the first two reels, some very questionable sound design, but uh, it works
MASH
with
has
it.
that too.
MASH has it. Nashville has it. That was a Robert Altman thing, but he played with the soundtrack to guide your ears.
Cimino didn't.
Cimino did not, and Once Upon a Time in America has this same kind of sense of the grandiose, without any sense of urgency, without anything propelling it forward, other than just the dead weight of it maybe falling down a hill. Like, it just drags and just flumps down as it goes along, pulled by gravity but not an impetus.
Yeah.
So what do you have?
Well, number one, make sure to go see this movie. Check out
It's
the Criterion
I'm
edition.
complaining about it, but it is worth the time. I started it way too late at night. My wife had a
Everybody who
paper
sees this
due, so
movie, everybody who sees this movie seems to have a different opinion about it.
hmm.
So go and watch it for yourself. Check it out. Give yourself to it. Give it the time and attention, and see what you come away with. My recommendations are based on specific actors. For Chris Christopherson, absolutely, I would like people to check out John Sayles Lone Star.
Mm.
That was his best performance. He plays a corrupt sheriff in that, and it is his best performance ever. He is magnificent in that film. They were talking about an Oscar nomination for him for that.
Really? So he was better than in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore? Because he was great in that.
I think it was just as good. I think he was actually
Okay.
made probably better because
Wow.
it's a meteor role. It's a
Sure,
villain.
sure.
And it's a fantastic movie.
John Sayles is
Isabelle
always
Huppert.
good.
I love John Sayles. Isabelle Huppert. Watch the film she got the Oscar nomination for last year. It was called Elle.
Hmm.
It's a really, really good movie. I'm not going to say anything about it.
So is Things to Come, the one that she should have been nominated for.
Yeah, yeah. I like both. Christopher Walken. Watch the movies that he made before he became a giant parody of himself. One of his best performances, and I don't think it ever really gets the credit it deserves, is The Dead Zone.
Yeah, that is often talked about when Walken's brought up. I haven't
It's
seen that.
it's largely it's based on a Stephen King novel.
Hmm.
So Stephen King takes all the credit, gets all the. It's a really good performance. As a man who's in a car accident and gains this power that when he touches your hand, he can see how you're going to die.
I wonder if that happened to Stephen King after his car accident.
I don't know, possibly. But
He doesn't go out much
it's a,
anymore.
it's a good performance about a man who is completely blindsided
Right.
by a power that he does not understand.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to say anything more about it. If you haven't seen it, but Jeff Bridges, Hell or High Water.
Oh, that was such
That
a
is a
good movie.
magnificent film.
Oh,
He's trying to catch these two bank robbers,
so good. And a
but there's a
very,
lot to the bank.
very underappreciated Chris Pine performance.
I believe he got an Oscar nomination for that.
Bridges did, yes.
Bridges did, yeah. And it's a
Pine maybe should have, but
yeah. His time will come. And I can do this for
we'll talk more
self-indulgence.
about him.
I can do this for self-indulgence. Sam Waterston, I'm going to recommend again Crimes and Misdemeanors because I love that movie.
The Killing Fields. I mean, the Killing Fields is where he got his Oscar nomination. Yeah.
It's about the exterminations in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he got an Oscar nomination for that.
Which, it's that is
and John Hurt in just about anything else.
pretty much, yeah. I mean, The Elephant Man, Alien, heck, The Day of the Doctor when he got to play the War Doctor on Doctor Who.
Yeah, he played his last really great role was in Jackie. He played
Oh yeah. Oh.
And he doesn't have much screen time, but his role in that is really really great.
Very potent.
Profound wisdom.
Very powerful.
It's about the 4 days after the Kennedy assassination, what Jackie went through.
Mm-hmm.
And he plays a priest, but that's what I got.
The President John Kennedy assassination, not the presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy assassination that happened a few years later.
But anyway, that's what I got.
What are we doing next week?
It's Star Trek!
Yay!
I planned Star Trek months ago, and it has been killing me. I have been so ready to get to this. We are going to spend the month of May, 4 episodes of this show, talking about all of the Star Trek movies. Next week, we're going to talk about the first 3, Motion Picture, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second week is going to be 4, 5, and 6.
So the Voyage Home, The Final Frontier, and The Undiscovered Country.
Which is really uneven.
Oh, I mean, at least it bookends with 2 really entertaining.
That's true.
Because
the third week we're going to talk about the 4 Next Generation movies. One
and a half of them are pretty good.
Yeah. We'll discuss which half. And then the final week we're going to talk about the Abrams trilogy. You'll have to forgive us. The last one, if you're listening to this 10 years from now, forgive us. The latest Star Trek movie has been Star Trek Beyond.
Right. The Star Trek 4 that will either be the one that Simon Pegg co-wrote or the one that Quentin Tarantino is pitching. We don't really know at this point what that's actually going to turn out to be, or some weirdo hybrid of the two. So we have no idea at this point how that's going to play out. So we apologize, and maybe by the time that comes out, we'll do a rejoinder episode.
Oh yeah. Next week, though, is we're going to talk about Star Trek Motion Picture. We're going to talk about the Wrath of Khan, and we're going to talk about Search for Spock. I'm looking forward to it. I have all of them on Blu-ray. I do love the Star Trek movies and the shows. I have the ones I like, which is really frustrating if you look at my shelf. Oh. So we'll get into one.
I got the box sets. I just I couldn't not. But so we'll be diving in. We'll be boldly going where many people have gone before. It's not unlike giving a visit to Ella in
Yeah.
Heaven's Gate. We're going where many men have boldly gone, but we are doing so with reckless abandon and incessant joy. So yeah, a lot of people, I guess, wouldn't do it. So that wraps it up for us. On behalf of my co-host Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic for ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com, and myself, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com. You can find all of our back episodes on the internet here at www.thepodbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. The podcast is on Twitter at pod_bay, and we also have a Facebook page, I think.
We now have a Facebook page.
Yeah.
I'm
which
getting
I
this out there on social media.
which I said before the text reminding me came through. Yay!
Sometimes you get in a hole. I know that because I do that all the time.
So that is where you can find us. We deeply appreciate you sticking around and listening to us, and we look forward to chatting again about Star Trek next week. Thank you very much for listening, and the pod bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.